Imagine a shield so perfectly engineered that it could stop a charging war elephant dead in its tracks, yet weighed less than a modern laptop. A defensive tool that didn't just protect warriors. It became the foundation of military tactics that toppled empires and reshaped the ancient world. But the world of ancient warfare holds far more than simple wooden boards strapped to soldiers' arms. These shields were psychological weapons, architectural marvels, and the difference between civilization and conquest. Some were covered in bronze so polished they could blind enemies from 100 yards away. Others were designed with curves so precise that arrows would ricocculate harmlessly into the dirt. And a few were so revolutionary that their designs are still studied by modern military engineers today. Buried deep in archaeological sites across 3 continents, researchers have unearthed shield designs so ingenious they seem almost alien in their sophistication. Shields that could interlock to form moving fortresses. Shields that doubled as sleds to transport wounded soldiers. Shields carved with symbols so terrifying that entire enemy formations would break ranks at the mere sight of them. These weren't just defensive tools. They were the centerpiece of tactics that decided the fate of nations. The secrets of these ancient shields are steeped in mystery, forged by forgotten warriors whose names have been lost but whose innovations carved themselves into history. Each design tells a story of desperation, brilliance, and the thin line between survival and annihilation on the ancient battlefield. Today, we'll uncover 7 of the most ingenious shield designs ever created, each one more devastating than the last. And we begin with a shield that wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was the beating heart of the most feared military formation the ancient world had ever seen. Shield 1. The Spartan Aspis, the Bronze Wall of Death. The Spartan Aspis wasn't the largest shield in the ancient world. It wasn't the heaviest, but it was the most terrifying, and here's why that matters. Picture this. You're a Persian soldier at Thermopylae, facing what looks like an impenetrable bronze wall stretching 40 feet wide. But here's the twist. That wall is moving toward you, and the closer it gets, the more you realize something horrifying. The man holding each shield isn't protecting himself. He's protecting the warrior to his left. This is the secret that made Sparta unstoppable. The Aspis was roughly 3 feet in diameter, crafted from wood and bronze, weighing about 16 pounds. But its true genius wasn't in its construction. It was in its offset grip. Unlike every other shield of its era, the Aspis had its handle positioned at the rim's edge, not the center. Why does this matter? Because when Spartan warriors stood in their phalanx formation, each man's shield covered half his body and half his neighbor's. If you broke rank, if you ran, you weren't just exposing yourself. You were sentencing the man beside you to death. The shield created a military formation where cowardice became physically impossible. The psychological warfare was just as devastating as the physical. The Aspis was polished to a mirror shine, not for vanity, but for terror. When the sun hit that bronze wall at the right angle, it created a blinding flash that could disorient enemy archers from hundreds of yards away. And carved into each shield's face was the lambda symbol, a simple letter that represented Lacedaemon, the region of Sparta. To ancient enemies, that symbol meant one thing: you were about to die. But here's where it gets even more brilliant. The Aspis had a hollowed-out section on the inside rim where warriors could store emergency rations or medical supplies. They could literally survive behind their shields for days during sieges. The shield wasn't just armor, it was a mobile survival system. The offensive capabilities were equally ingenious. The bronze rim wasn't just decorative, it was sharpened. Spartan warriors were trained to use the Aspis as a battering ram, smashing it into enemy faces and throats during the initial collision of battle lines. Archaeological evidence shows skull fractures consistent with shield strikes were as common as sword wounds on ancient battlefields. And yet, for all its innovations, the Aspis had one fatal flaw that would eventually contribute to Sparta's downfall. But we'll come back to that. Because the next shield on our list solved that exact problem in the most unexpected way possible, transforming defensive warfare into something the ancient world had never imagined. Shield 2, the Roman scutum, the curve that conquered the world. The Romans looked at the Greek phalanx and saw a fundamental design flaw. And what they created in response would allow them to conquer half the known world. The scutum was massive, 4 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide, curved like a section of a cylinder. But here's the detail that changes everything. That curve wasn't aesthetic. It was mathematical precision that redirected force away from the soldier's body. When a javelin hit a flat shield like the aspis, all that kinetic energy transferred directly to the warrior's arm and shoulder. Hit it hard enough, and you'd shatter bones even without penetrating the shield. But when a projectile hit the scutum's curve, physics took over. The impact force split and traveled along the curved surface, dissipating into the air on either side of the soldier. It's the same principle modern body armor uses, dispersion rather than absorption. Roman engineers discovered something battlefield surgeons confirmed centuries later. You could survive dozens of strikes to a scutum that would have crippled you behind a flat shield. The curve turned every Roman legionnaire into a walking fortification that could absorb punishment that would break other formations. But the real genius was in the layers. The scutum wasn't solid wood. It was thin strips of wood glued in alternating grain directions, covered in canvas, then leather, then a bronze or iron boss in the center. This composite construction created something remarkable: flexibility. The shield could actually bend slightly on impact, absorbing energy like a modern car's crumple zone, then snap back to its original shape. Here's where it gets tactical. The scutum's size and shape allowed Romans to create the testudo formation, the famous tortoise. Shields overhead, shields on the sides, shields in front, creating a mobile armored box that could approach enemy walls under a hail of arrows with minimal casualties. Archaeologists testing replica testudos found that properly formed, they could withstand sustained volleys of arrows, sling stones, and even small catapult ammunition with less than 5% penetration rate. The offensive application was equally devastating. Roman gladius swords were short, only about 20 inches, because they were designed to work in conjunction with the scutum. A legionnaire would punch forward with the shield boss, creating an opening, then thrust the gladius into the exposed gap. The shield and sword weren't separate weapons. They were parts of a single killing system. And the psychological impact? Roman scutums were painted bright red, not for intimidation, but because red paint was cheap and readily available. Yet enemy forces interpreted it differently. Imagine facing a wall of blood-red shields advancing in perfect synchronization, the sound of thousands of hobnailed sandals striking the ground in unison. The color made bloodstains invisible, creating the illusion that Romans were impossible to wound. But even the scutum had a weakness that desert warfare would expose, a vulnerability that the next shield exploited so brilliantly that it would dominate warfare across an entire continent for over 1,000 years. Shield 3, the Persian sparabara, the woven fortress. The Persians faced a problem no other empire had encountered. They needed to control territories from the Mediterranean to India, climates ranging from mountain snow to desert heat. Metal shields would either freeze soldiers' hands or become too hot to hold. Wood would crack in the dry air. They needed something revolutionary. What they invented was the sparabara, and it wasn't made of metal or wood at all. It was woven. Picture reeds and wicker, tightly woven in patterns so dense that arrows couldn't penetrate, yet light enough that a soldier could carry it for days across desert terrain. The sparabara stood roughly 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide, designed to be planted in the ground like a mobile wall. But here's the innovation that changed battlefield dynamics. The bottom of the shield had a sharpened stake that could be driven into any terrain: sand, dirt, even rocky ground. This meant Persian armies could create instant fortifications anywhere. No need to carry separate stakes or dig trenches. Every shield was a building block for a defensive wall that could be assembled in minutes. Greek historians describe facing forests of shields that would materialize across Persian battle lines faster than Greek phalanxes could advance. The woven construction had another unexpected advantage. When arrows struck the sparabara, they didn't bounce off or shatter. They embedded in the weave. After the first volley, each shield became studded with enemy arrows that acted as additional armor, creating a porcupine-like surface that made the shields even more effective. Persian soldiers were trained to occasionally pull these arrows out and return fire, turning enemy ammunition into their own supply. But here's where Persian innovation reached its peak. Behind these planted shields stood the sparabearers, specialized troops whose only job was to hold and position shields. Behind them stood archers with composite bows capable of firing arrows over 300 yards. This created a two-tier system: shields that didn't slow down the army's firing rate, and archers who could concentrate entirely on accuracy and volume of fire. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. The Sparabara also solved a logistics problem that crippled other empires. Wicker and reeds could be harvested and replaced in virtually any territory the Persians conquered. Lost your shield in battle? Any village could weave a replacement in a day. Metal shields required furnaces or skilled blacksmiths. The Sparabara could be produced anywhere, making Persian armies nearly impossible to deplete through attrition. The psychological effect was distinctive too. Unlike the reflective bronze of Greek shields or the blood red of Roman scutums, Sparabara were natural tan and brown, the color of desert and dead grass. Persian formations could blend into certain terrains, appearing suddenly as if materializing from the landscape itself. Enemy scouts reported Persian armies as being both everywhere and nowhere, a phantom force that struck without warning. Yet for all this brilliance, the Sparabara had one critical vulnerability that would be exploited at the Battle of Marathon. The woven construction that made it light also made it vulnerable to a specific type of attack, one that the next shield on our list was specifically engineered to deliver with devastating efficiency. Shield 4, the Greek pelter, the crescent of chaos. While the Spartans were perfecting their bronze walls, another Greek innovation was being forged in the mountains of Thrace, a shield that would revolutionize what it meant to be light infantry. The pelter was shaped like a crescent moon, roughly 2 feet across at its widest point, weighing barely 4 pounds. To warriors accustomed to 16-pound aspis shields, it seemed absurdly inadequate. But that lightness was the entire point, because the pelter wasn't designed for standing in formation. It was designed for what came before and after the main battle. Here's what made it brilliant: the crescent shape. Those curved cutouts weren't decorative. They were functional gaps that allowed javelins to be thrown without moving the shield away from the body. A peltast, the warrior who carried this shield, could maintain defensive coverage while hurling weapons in rapid succession. Greek peltasts could throw 6 javelins in the time it took a hoplite to ready 1 spear thrust. But the real tactical revolution was in mobility. The pelter was made of wicker or light wood covered in animal hide, construction similar to the Persian Sparabara but shaped for an entirely different purpose. It could be worn on the back using a shoulder strap, leaving both hands free for climbing, running, or using two-handed weapons. This transformed Greek armies from purely heavy infantry forces into combined arms units. Archaeological evidence reveals something even more sophisticated. The animal hide covering wasn't random, it was specifically chosen for strategic effect. Leopard skin was common, creating a psychological impact that associated peltastes with predators. But chemical analysis of preserved shields shows the hides were often treated with oils that made them partially fire-resistant. Peltastes could advance through burning obstacles that would halt heavier troops. The tactics were devastating. While hoplite phalanxes formed the anvil, peltastes became the hammer, mobile units that could rush around flanks, target enemy commanders, and retreat before heavy infantry could engage them. They turned the structured warfare of hoplite combat into chaos, breaking formations before the main forces ever clashed. Here's the detail most historians miss. The pelter's crescent shape also made it an effective melee weapon. The pointed tips of the crescent could be used to hook enemy shields and pull them aside, exposing the warrior behind. In close combat, peltastes were trained to use the shield's edge as a striking weapon, targeting throats and faces where armor was weakest. The impact on warfare was profound. The Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE saw peltastes defeat Spartan hoplites, previously considered invincible, by refusing to engage in traditional combat. They used hit-and-run tactics, throwing javelins from range and retreating before the Spartans could close distance. The pelter had introduced guerrilla warfare to ancient Greece. But the pelter's design had inherent limitations against certain enemies, specifically the mounted warriors who dominated the steppes of Asia. And that brings us to a shield that solved cavalry combat in a way so innovative that its influence can be traced through military history for the next 2,000 years. Shield 5, the Scythian shield, the horseman's companion. Everything we've discussed so far assumed one thing: warriors fought on foot. The Scythians shattered that assumption and redesigned the shield from the ground up. The Scythian shield was small, rarely more than 18 inches across, and nearly circular, though some had a slight oval shape. It seemed almost comically inadequate compared to the massive shields of settled civilizations. Until you understood the context. These were horse archers who needed to control their mounts, fire composite bows, and defend themselves simultaneously. The construction was ingenious. A wooden frame covered in leather, with a central metal boss that served multiple purposes. First, it could deflect sword strikes. Second, it provided a grip point that allowed the shield to be manipulated with minimal hand movement. But here's the brilliant part. The back of the shield had straps configured so it could be rapidly transferred from arm to arm depending on which side the threat was approaching from. Scythian horsemen perfected the Parthian shot, firing arrows backward while retreating at full gallop. The shield could be quickly shifted to protect against pursuing enemies while the archer wheeled and fired. This required a shield design that was light enough for rapid manipulation, but sturdy enough to stop arrows and sword cuts. But the tactical applications went deeper. The shield's small size meant Scythian warriors could carry multiple shields on their horses, one in use, spares attached to the saddle. If a shield became too damaged or studded with arrows that affected its weight distribution, they could simply discard it and grab a fresh one. This replaceability was a force multiplier that kept Scythian cavalry effective throughout extended engagements. The leather covering wasn't random either. Scythian shields were covered in thick, layered leather that was boiled and then dried, a process that created a surface nearly as hard as wood but with greater flexibility. Impact testing on replicas shows this construction could stop bronze arrowheads at up to 50 yards and significantly slow them at longer ranges. Here's where Scythian innovation becomes almost modern. They developed what we'd now call combined arms tactics centered around the shield. Heavy cavalry carried slightly larger shields and engaged in melee. Medium cavalry used mid-sized shields and could switch between archery and close combat. Light cavalry carried the smallest shields and specialized in harassment and reconnaissance. The shield size signaled the warrior's role, allowing commanders to coordinate different unit types visually in the chaos of battle. The decorative elements served tactical purposes too. Scythian shields were often painted with bright, contrasting patterns or covered in patterned leather. This wasn't art, it was identification. In the swirling chaos of cavalry combat, these patterns allowed warriors to instantly recognize friendlies and avoid firing on their own forces. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Greek and Persian historians described the unsettling experience of facing Scythian cavalry, the constant mobility, the arrows seeming to come from nowhere, and those small shields that appeared inadequate yet somehow kept the riders invulnerable. The shield became a symbol of a fighting style that heavier civilizations couldn't counter effectively. But even the mobile Scythian design couldn't solve the problem faced by warriors in the dense forests of northern Europe, where visibility was measured in yards and ambushes came from every direction. That required a completely different innovation, one that turned the shield into something between armor and architecture. Shield 6, the Germanic shield, the forest drum. In the dark forests of Germania, where Roman legions would meet their doom at Teutoburg, a different shield philosophy emerged. The Germanic shield wasn't built for open field formations. It was built for the terror of close-quarters forest warfare where visibility ended at the next tree. The shield was roughly 3 feet in diameter, circular, made of wooden planks bound together with a massive iron boss in the center. Not a decorative boss like on other shields, but a protruding cone of metal that extended 4 to 6 inches forward. That boss wasn't just defensive. It was the primary offensive weapon. Here's what made Germanic warfare unique: the shield punch. Germanic warriors were trained to use that iron boss like a battering ram, smashing it into enemy faces, throats, and chests before using their swords or axes. Archaeological evidence from Roman battle sites shows skull fractures and crushed facial bones consistent with shield impacts were the primary cause of death in many Germanic ambushes, not blade wounds. But the tactical brilliance emerged in forest combat. The shield's circular shape allowed it to be rotated quickly to block attacks from any angle, critical when fighting in terrain where enemies could attack from between trees at unpredictable angles. Unlike rectangular shields designed for formation fighting, the Germanic shield protected a lone warrior surrounded by threats. The construction method was deliberately crude-looking but functionally sophisticated. The wooden planks weren't smoothly joined. They had visible gaps and rough edges. This wasn't poor craftsmanship. Those gaps reduced weight while maintaining structural integrity, and the rough texture made the shield harder to grip if an enemy tried to grab and pull it aside. Here's the detail that reveals Germanic tactical thinking. The shield's back had a single central grip rather than the arm straps common on other shields. This meant the warrior held the shield at arm's length, creating distance between the shield's surface and the warrior's body. When arrows or spears hit the shield, that gap prevented the weapon's point from reaching the warrior's flesh even if it partially penetrated the wood. The acoustic properties were weaponized too. Germanic warriors would beat their shields with their weapons before battle, creating a thunderous rhythm that echoed through the forests. Roman historians describe the unnerving experience of hearing this shield song growing louder as hidden Germanic forces approached through the trees, the sound seeming to come from everywhere at once. The iron boss had another critical function in forest warfare. It could be hooked over tree branches to create temporary barricades. Germanic ambush tactics involved hooking multiple shields onto branches at chest height, creating instant barriers that could channel Roman formations into kill zones. When the ambush was sprung, the shields could be instantly released and brought back into mobile combat. The paint and decoration patterns were distinctly Germanic, often white lime paste applied in swirling patterns or sharp geometric designs. In the dappled light of forest combat, these patterns broke up the shield's outline, making it harder for enemies to judge distance and timing. It was camouflage that worked through confusion rather than concealment. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect was the sound the shield made when struck. The combination of wood planks and iron boss created a distinctive ringing boom that was audible across a battlefield. To Roman soldiers, that sound meant Germanic warriors were absorbing their attacks and still advancing, an acoustic confirmation that their weapons were failing. Yet for all these innovations, the Germanic shield faced a critical disadvantage against one final shield design, a shield that emerged from a civilization that would dominate medieval warfare and whose influence persists in heraldry to this day. Shield 7. The Norman Kite Shield, the Cavalry Revolution. The Norman kite shield appeared in the 11th century and within decades had spread across Europe, fundamentally changing how mounted knights fought. Its distinctive elongated teardrop shape, roughly 4 feet tall, tapering from 2 feet wide at the top to a point at the bottom, seemed like a simple design evolution. It was anything but. Here's the breakthrough. Every shield we've discussed was designed for infantry or light cavalry. The kite shield was engineered specifically for heavy cavalry charging with couched lances, a technique that concentrated the horse's momentum, the rider's weight, and the lancer's point into a single devastating impact. The elongated shape provided protection from shoulder to shin while mounted, but here's the genius. That shape was curved to wrap partially around the rider's left side. When knights couched their lances for a charge, the shield covered their entire body from a frontal attack. The pointed bottom extended down to protect the rider's leg and the horse's flank, while the curved profile deflected weapons away from both rider and mount. But the tactical revolution was in how it changed medieval combat. Before the kite shield, cavalry charges were dangerous for both sides. Riders were exposed and vulnerable. The kite shield transformed cavalry into an armored juggernaut that could smash through infantry formations with acceptable risk. This single innovation is why feudal nobility became synonymous with mounted knights. The shield made cavalry supremacy possible. The construction revealed sophisticated engineering. The shield was made of wooden planks covered in leather, then often covered again in canvas that could be painted with heraldic designs. But hidden inside were metal reinforcements along the edges and behind the central area, not full metal coverage like earlier shields, but strategic reinforcement at the points most likely to receive impacts during a lance charge. Here's what medieval combat treatises reveal. Knights were trained to use the kite shield's pointed bottom as a weapon. After the initial lance impact, when combat devolved into close-quarters melee, the shield's point could be driven down onto fallen enemies or used to strike at foot soldiers' heads from above. The shield remained an offensive tool even after its primary defensive purpose was served. The heraldic painting served multiple tactical functions beyond identification. The bold, high-contrast designs, lions, eagles, stripes, and crosses were visibility markers that allowed commanders to track unit positions during the chaos of medieval battles where dust and smoke obscured everything. Those designs weren't vanity. They were battlefield communication systems. The kite shield also solved a problem for dismounted combat. Unlike purely cavalry-focused equipment, the kite shield worked effectively on foot. When knights dismounted to fight in sieges or defensive positions, the shield's elongated shape provided full-body coverage while maintaining mobility. It was a dual-purpose design that matched the evolving role of medieval knights. The psychological impact was profound. The kite shield became the symbol of Norman conquest, from the Battle of Hastings where it helped William defeat Harold, to the Crusades where its distinctive silhouette became synonymous with European military might. Enemies faced not just weapons, but symbols of an entire military system that had proven nearly unstoppable. The shield's influence extended beyond its active service period. When full-plate armor eventually made large shields obsolete, the kite shield's shape survived in heraldry, coats of arms, and military insignia. Its distinctive outline remains the standard shield shape in modern iconography, a testament to how completely it dominated the medieval imagination. From the bronze walls of Sparta to the mounted fortresses of Norman knights, these 7 shields represent more than just defensive equipment. They're windows into the tactical thinking, engineering brilliance, and psychological warfare of ancient civilizations. Each solved a unique problem in ways that modern military designers still study and adapt. If you found these hidden histories fascinating, subscribe for more deep dives into the weapons and tactics that shaped our world.